Hi everyone, so now going into another Arcane deep dive. This time we're looking at the question of why basically Vi was so easily put in jail and out of jail. But when you think about it, it's kind of odd. I mean, you want to have some sort of a consistent way of handling justice or injustice, so to speak. And actually, when you look at it, Piltover has a particular kind of very loose way of dealing with this particular issue. So that while at one glance you're thinking about why is it so easy to just like throw someone in jail and have no record, and then another character comes in and just easily gets this person out of jail. That seems so odd. Now, it seems odd probably from two perspectives. One is most of the people thinking that just think of how things are normally done in their own lives, like in their own country. I mean, there is a system of due process in most Western democracies, though sometimes that can be shaky at times. And also, of course, when we see Arcane, there's, of course, this part where there's the explosion episode 1 and 2, and Jace is actually put on trial. Now, put on trial is kind of a loose term when you actually think about this, because he is dragged before the council, and it's not like he has a lawyer. You don't even hear uh, any other information. Maybe that's due with respect to time. I'm not really sure. I mean, you don't hear like Grayson reporting on what she found in the actual apartment of Jace, and we don't really know if anyone said anything or what the reports were related to that. In fact, Jace has to speak on his behalf, and if you have yourself as a client, you're a fool for a lawyer. So basically, Jace was put in a very bad situation. Now, based on Jace's mother's comment, is that the House of Palace, which is the house that Jace belongs to, is a lower house. So that means you basically have upper house and a lower house, and maybe people, just normal common people who live on the north side of Piltover. Now, hearing that makes you wonder a little bit because it looks like that the council members basically hear whatever is going to be said, whether by Jason, maybe some other people. We don't know exactly how the normal operations are, but we do know that, at least in a scene from Mill, that they hear some cases from time to time. But again, if it's from an upper house, then you might think, okay, maybe, the scales of justice are not quite even here. Maybe, there's little give and takes. And you know that, for example, like Heimerdinger goes, well, you can just get off with just a slap on the wrist if, he has a certain amount of pull. So it was like, kind of interesting because, normally you would think that there'd be rules for these types of things. If you have a certain set of forbidden items, or you did a certain thing that, like having an explosive in your house, which is probably not something that you should have without some sort of licensing agreement or something. There would be set rules for this. And, the sense is, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So this kind of looks very shaky. Now, not only that, when we look at that, of course, is that when there's actually any time that someone is actually held in court, is, the other people around. So, I mean, like anyone can watch this. So it's kind of interesting there. But that is kind of a facade. There's not really much due process here. There's not like a right to silence. There's no lawyer who is, acting on your behalf. There's none of that. I mean, it's just kind of maybe not exactly a formality, but at least some sense of not terribly reliable justice. Now, this is way better than what the people in the Undercity get. Now, we are seeing in this case of the interaction between Caitlyn and Marcus that the guy in the kind of lower part of the airship, the big fat muscly guy, who they don't know if this is a guy who was part of the smuggling operation or something else. But what ends up happening is that Marcus pretty much tells the other police officer to just have this guy thrown in Stillwater prison. Now, some of you may have not thought anything about this, but it's like, wait a minute. It's like, what did this guy do? Okay, maybe he smuggled some stuff. Okay, fine. But it's like no hearing? Not even like in front of some sort of magistrate? Like there's nothing like that? Maybe not even like getting dragged in front of council members for some sort of trial? Nothing. And look, Marcus has the authority to throw this guy straight into prison with some sort of unspecified amount of time in prison. I mean, you see later in the series, the guy he like hardly any processing. I mean, he's like the guy's already shot. Maybe he gets medical attention in the prison. We don't know. It just Marcus has that kind of authority. Now, that's kind of scary when you think about it. So whatever Marcus decides, since he is the sheriff of Piltover, he can practically throw people into prison or in some sort of jailing facility, however he feels like it. And if you actually look here in the case of when they were investigating the cause of the perpetrators of the explosion, basically Marcus, and I assume that any other ranking official of the police force, or actually enforcers as they're called, can basically go into anybody's place and ransack it and search it and whatever. I mean, if it were a normal Western democracy with normal due process, you would think that this guy would actually have some sort of, summons or like a warrant or something, some sort of paper with a seal of something that shows him what he can and can't do. But obviously that doesn't happen. And in fact, if you look throughout the rest of episode 2, basically the enforcers are acting like jerks and just kind of intimidating and pushing people around and chasing people and doing all other kinds of stuff that is typically unpleasant and probably by other people's sensibilities would be abusive. But what we see here is the fact that in Piltover there is a very lack of due process or any kind of structure that is really going on. Now, having that said, I mean, it actually makes sense about what actually is going on. I mean, when we actually look in the situation where Marcus takes Vi away, which, in a twisted sense, was actually in Vi's best interest at the time. And if Vi was actually going to go back to save Powder, with Silco's goons already there, she in her injured situation would have no chance. She would be get killed exactly as what Marcus said. And so Marcus basically takes her and throws her in prison. Now, we know in this particular situation that basically the council was sort of asking for their pound of flesh, but of course Marcus, with his probably extreme authority there, can pretty much say, hey, there's an explosion down at the cannery. The people who were there, they're pretty much dead. They were also the same people who caused the explosion. The explosions were the same. I have pictures of like people who are already dead. That's justice is served. Boom, done. And probably as far as the council's concerned, is like they don't have trials for the lower people because Marcus can just throw people in jail however he wants it. It's like, hey, no trial, boom, done. So, I mean, I'm sure some people thought, wait a minute, why didn't I get a trial? I mean, it would seem kind of odd for Marcus, to somehow just like disappear a person. But it's like if we looked at episode 4 and Marcus can just like throw the big muscle guy in jail, he can throw anyone in jail if he wants to. Which then sets up an issue, which is, okay, once Marcus disappears into Stillwater Prison, into the darkest depths where there's no records of this person even existing and probably there to rot for all eternity, who could get this person out? Now, the only person who would have any type of authority to actually get Vi out of prison would, of course, be Caitlyn and Caitlyn's connection to Jace. So, what we mean here basically is that any council member can basically get anyone out by fiat. It's not like some somewhat odd abuse of the council members' power. It's what they do. So Caitlyn could, of course, forged Jace's signature or seal or something. I'm sure. I mean, she had one of his papers. It was like she could do it. Now, I mean, that is one explanation. Now, of course, since Jace was kind of nonchalant about the fact that Marcus kind of casually commented that Caitlyn had someone freed from prison, maybe there is a situation where Caitlyn actually got Jace's authority without Jace really thinking too deeply about it. I mean, there's basically a cut there between Caitlyn actually talking to Vi and then Caitlyn actually providing paperwork to the jailer. So, I mean, there could be some sort of space of time where she could have actually just thrown the paperwork and just asked for forgiveness later. Don't really know too much about that situation, but it seems very clear that overall justice of any type that is done in Piltover is pretty much under the authority of the council members. They have the ultimate authority. They can do whatever they want. If they want to throw someone in jail, they can. If they want to have some sort of formality of some sort of showish trial type of Star Chamber type of thing without any real good representation or real strong rules of evidence or anything like that, it's like, they can do that too. I mean, for the upper houses, at least to kind of give a showing of justice, that sort of thing. But for most people, it's probably like, whatever. Marcus has whatever authority he wants. So that, I think, is what's really going on. When you're thinking about creating a world and you're thinking about how you would run justice or injustice, seems to be happening in many cases around Piltover, you want to think about how the system works or how a system works in different phases of history. And I think you shouldn't really compare, modern democracies, the whole rule of law, rule of process. These are very recent modern inventions, and it's things that usually don't pop up in fantasy or steampunk or any of these other types, because those types of organizations, they're more reliant on more of kind of a medieval, more ancient way of doing things, even though in some places they had a much more sophisticated a way of actually running justice. But there you go. In any case, Piltover, yeah, if you committed a crime, you're probably pretty much screwed over. Even if you haven't committed that much of a crime, if you, of course, basically offend the wrong person, you could also be in a really bad situation. Well, anyway, that's all I have to say about the Piltover system of justice or injustice, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.